She stepped into the rehearsal hall slowly, almost like she was afraid the floor might crack under her feet. The room was bigger than any place she had ever played, in tall ceilings, shining lights, rows of polished chairs, and that enormous grand piano sitting in the center like it ruled the whole space. She wasn't used to places like this. She wasn't used to people turning to stare at her either. But that was exactly what happened. Every head lifted as she walked in, and every pair of eyes landed on her with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. She kept her eyes down, holding her hands close to her sides. She knew why they were all looking at her. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a music workshop taught by a world-famous pianist. She didn't have fancy clothes or expensive accessories. She didn't even carry a real piano case, just a small folder with sheet music that was worn from years of use. The hall went quiet when the renowned pianist walked in. He wasn't the type who smiled to make people feel comfortable. His face was sharp and serious, and the way he carried himself made everyone straighten in their seats. He didn't waste time on greetings or warm-up talk. He simply glanced around the room, studying each student one by one. Then his eyes reached her. For a moment, she felt like she had been caught doing something wrong. His expression didn't say a word, but the message was clear. She won't last long here. He gestured toward the piano, signaling that she was next to perform. A few students exchanged quiet whispers, and she didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. She felt the same knot of worry twisting in her stomach. Still, she walked to the piano. Her legs felt stiff, as though the air around her had grown heavier with every step. When she reached the bench, she sat carefully, trying not to make noise that might draw even more attention. The piano felt huge in front of her. She had played on small keyboards, old upright pianos, and once in a while a slightly better one at a community center. But nothing like this. The keys looked untouched, like they belonged to someone far more confident than she was. She lifted her hands and rested them lightly on her lap. She hadn't even played a single note yet, and already the renowned pianist was tapping his foot, clearly impatient. He expected a shaky performance, a weak attempt, something he could correct quickly before moving on to the next student. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. She remembered practicing late at night in her small room back home. The old keyboard she used made a buzzing sound whenever she pressed more than a few keys at once. Some notes didn't even work anymore, but she learned to play around them. She memorized melodies because she didn't always have printed music. She taught herself timing by tapping on the edge of her bed. Music was all she had, and it had carried her through everything. Now, sitting in front of a grand piano that looked too perfect for her hands, she wondered if all her practice would matter. A soft cough came from the audience area, and she realized she had been silent too long. She let out a slow breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The cool touch of the piano sent a small shiver through her. She tried to settle the tremor in her hands, but the pressure of being watched made it difficult. The renowned pianist crossed his arms, waiting. His face showed no encouragement, only expectation of her failure. She swallowed hard. People always said confidence was important when performing, but confidence wasn't something she had grown up with. She had learned to push forward through fear, not erase it. Sitting there, she felt every bit of that fear crawling up her spine. Still, she wanted to try. She reminded herself of why she came to this workshop. She hadn't been invited, she had saved up money to attend. She wanted a chance to learn, a chance to see what she was capable of if she stepped into a world much larger than her own. She knew she might not be the best. She knew she might be judged. But she also knew that she loved music in a way she struggled to explain. The pianist gave a small wave of his hand, signaling her to begin. She nodded faintly. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Her heart raced faster. Everyone's eyes were on her, waiting to see if she would crumble. And for a moment, she almost did. Her mind filled with doubt. What if she hit the wrong note? What if her hands shook so much that she couldn't play at all? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these skilled students, who had probably played on instruments like this their entire lives? But then she remembered something, one simple thing that helped her push through all the difficult moments before. This was just a piano. Yes, it was expensive. Yes, it was grand. Yes, the world-famous pianist stood only a few steps away. But at the end of the day, these were keys, and she knew keys better than she knew anything else in her life. She took a deep breath, letting her shoulders relax slightly, even if the room doubted her. She didn't want to doubt herself. She closed her eyes for a brief second, not long enough to draw attention, but long enough to remind herself of the little room where she practiced, the soft hum of her old keyboard, and the feeling of being alone with music. When she opened her eyes again, her hands felt steadier. She was still nervous, of course she was, but she wasn't frozen anymore. She pressed the first key lightly, not to play a note yet, but to remind herself that she had control. The sound was soft, barely heard by the others, but it was enough. It grounded her. Then she lifted her hands once more, preparing to play for real. People leaned slightly forward. The renowned pianist shifted his posture, ready to critique Dot, and she sat there, quiet and determined, hoping that when she finally played, her music would speak for her in a way her voice never could. For now, the room was waiting, and so was she. She sat perfectly still for a few seconds, trying to slow her breathing. Her fingers were resting on the keys now, but they weren't moving yet. It felt as though the entire room was holding its breath with her. She could sense the tension around her, the unspoken doubts, the silent judgments, the curiosity mixed with expectation. None of it helped settle her nerves. Her hands trembled slightly, and she curled her fingers just enough to hide it. She didn't want anyone to notice. She didn't want the renowned pianist to think she was scared, even though fear was crawling through her like a cold breeze. But she also knew one thing very clearly. She could not walk away. She had come too far to turn back. The pianist shifted his weight and raised an eyebrow, almost as if he was waiting for her to break the silence and start playing. He didn't say anything he didn't need to. His expression alone reminded her that he expected very little from her. Maybe nothing at all. She inhaled slowly and let the breath out through her nose. Then she pressed the first few notes, not loudly, but softly and carefully, making sure her hands didn't slip. The keys responded with a gentle, warm sound. It wasn't perfect, but it was controlled, and hearing the first few notes echo lightly through the hall gave her a small boost of confidence. But confidence was still something she needed to build, not something she had from the start. She continued playing the opening lines of the piece she had practiced for weeks. Her hands were stiff at first. She made one small mistake, barely noticeable, but she felt it. Her heart jolted. She wondered if everyone else heard it too. She wondered if the famous pianist was already marking her down in his mind. Her shoulders tensed, but she forced herself to continue. Stopping now would be worse. She reminded herself that even skilled players made mistakes. What mattered was how she recovered. So she kept going. Little by little, her hands began to loosen. The notes started flowing more naturally, not perfectly, but with sincerity. She could feel the music starting to come through her instead of being forced out. And she could sense the room slowly growing quieter, not just because they were listening, but because the music was starting to take shape in a way they didn't expect. As she moved into the next section of the piece, her nervousness rose again. This part was harder. These were the measures she always had trouble with, even at home. Her old keyboard had faulty keys in this area, so she used to practice by imagining the right sound rather than hearing it. She never knew if her fingers were truly hitting the notes correctly. But she wasn't on that old keyboard now. She was on a real piano, a piano that responded beautifully. If only she trusted herself enough. Her hands shook again as she entered the difficult section. One note almost slipped. She stopped herself just in time, pulling her fingers back into position. She froze for a split second, long enough that the audience wondered if she had lost her place. She hadn't. She just needed that one small pause to calm her thoughts. She looked straight at the keys, not at the pianist, not at the students, not at the expression of doubt she imagined on their faces. She breathed in deeply, and this time she allowed her hands to fall on the keys with a bit more weight. The next few notes came out stronger, clearer. They carried a kind of emotion she hadn't planned, something that came out of her naturally because she was tired of being scared. She wanted to prove not to the audience, not even to the pianist, but to herself that she could do more than people expected. Her back straightened, and her fingers seemed to find their confidence one note at a time. She made her way through the difficult part, not flawlessly, but with determination, and something changed inside her as she played. The fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling her hands instead. The music began to lead her. She remembered the late nights she had spent practicing in silence, when no one was watching and no one was judging. She remembered how the music helped her whenever she felt lonely, whenever life felt too heavy. Whenever she needed something steady to hold on to. She reminded herself that this room full of strangers didn't know her story. They didn't know how long she had worked for this moment. They only knew what they saw. So she decided to show them a version of herself they didn't expect. Her fingers moved more freely now, gliding across the keys with a kind of quiet courage. She wasn't playing loudly or dramatically. She didn't need to. Her strength came from how deeply she felt each note. The entire hall seemed to soften around her, as though even the air had begun to listen. The renowned pianist, who had been standing with his arms crossed, slowly lowered them. His face didn't fully change, but something in his eyes shifted. He wasn't leaning back anymore, he was slightly leaning forward. She didn't see this. She was too focused on the piano. She reached the middle section of the piece, which was gentler and slower. This was her favorite part, the one she always played when she felt overwhelmed. The soft, flowing melody calmed her, and the warmth of the sound helped her forget the pressure of the room. Her hands moved with surprising steadiness. The notes blended beautifully together, and for the first time since she sat down, she felt like she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply playing. She was letting herself be carried by the music, the way she always wished she could do in front of others. A small moment of peace washed over her. Her fear wasn't completely gone. It was still somewhere in the background, but it no longer held any power. She wasn't worried about mistakes now. She wasn't worried about being judged. She wasn't worried about whether she deserved to be in this room. She was just a girl playing a piano, and she loved playing the piano. As the melody softened, the room grew quiet enough that she could hear her own breathing between the notes. She wasn't sure if that was good or bad, but the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like the room was giving her space. Her hands slowed as she reached the end of the section, preparing for the transition into the more powerful part that would follow. This was the moment she had feared the most, not because it was difficult, but because it demanded confidence. The next part required her to play with strength she wasn't always sure she had, but she had come this far. She knew she couldn't turn back now. She took another breath, deeper this time, and let her fingers fall onto the keys with a little more force. The sound came out richer and stronger, filling the space in a way that surprised even her. She didn't plan for it to sound that bold, but she liked it. She continued, feeling the music rise and fall through her hands like a wave. She didn't think about the audience anymore. She didn't think about the renowned pianist or what he might be writing down about her performance. All she thought about was the next note, and then the next, and the next. Her hands moved almost instinctively now, as though the piece had become a part of her. She didn't need to think about each movement. Her fingers knew where they were going. Every practice session, every mistake, every night spent working on this piece had prepared her for this moment. The hall stayed silent as she played, the kind of silence that meant people were listening closely, not waiting for her to fail. She could feel that shift, even without looking up. For the first time since she entered the room, she felt something new, something small but real. Hope. She wasn't finished yet, but she was no longer afraid of finishing. She was no longer trying to survive the moment. She was becoming part of it. And as the final notes of the middle section faded into the air, she readied herself for the next powerful rise in the music, one that would challenge her again. She wasn't the same scared girl who sat down at the piano. She was someone who had begun to trust herself, and she was ready to keep going. The hall felt different now. It wasn't louder, and no one had moved much. But the air itself carried something new, something she had never felt in a room full of strangers. It was attention, real attention, the kind that wasn't waiting for her to mess up, but the kind that leaned in because her playing had pulled them in. She didn't know this yet. She didn't dare look up. All she could do was keep her eyes on the piano and trust her hands. Her fingers rested for a moment above the keys, steadying themselves before the piece shifted into the part that demanded more strength. This was the section she had always admired when listening to professionals play. It always felt powerful, like the music was lifting itself off the ground. But to play it herself, that was something she had never imagined she'd do in a room like this. She took a slow breath. It wasn't the nervous kind now, it was the kind she took when preparing to step into something bigger than she felt. Then she began. The first few notes came out with surprising force. They weren't harsh. They were full and deep, the kind of sound that filled the space even without being loud. Her fingers moved with more certainty, pushing into the keys with intention instead of fear. She could feel the wood beneath each key, the vibration of every note traveling lightly into her hands. For the first time in her life, she understood what people meant when they said a piano could respond to emotion. This one responded to everything she did. When she pressed gently, it hummed softly. When she leaned in, it answered with a richer, stronger voice. She didn't think she'd ever played like this before. As she moved into the rising sequence, her heart beat faster, not out of panic, but because she could feel the music building inside her. It was almost like something she had locked away was finally opening. She didn't know how to explain it, but it felt like she wasn't just playing the piece. She was becoming a part of it. The notes climbed higher, then dropped suddenly into a heavier rhythm. Her hands followed without hesitation. Every shift, every change in pace, every small detail she thought she might forget seemed to appear naturally beneath her fingertips. Behind her, she heard a small movement. It was the renowned pianist adjusting his stance. She didn't need to see him to know he was watching closer than before. She pushed forward. The next part required speed, a kind that always made her anxious during practice. At home, her fingers sometimes fell behind, especially when the piece demanded quick jumps from one section of the keyboard to another. She used to practice with a quiet frustration, wondering why her hands couldn't keep up with what her heart wanted. But today her hands felt ready. Her fingers moved faster, not rushed but sure. One note, then another, flowing into each other like a stream that refused to slow down. She didn't know where the confidence was coming from, but she didn't question it. She simply followed it. She felt the room shift again, not physically, but emotionally. There was a new silence now, one so deep that even the softest sound from the piano felt like it filled the entire hall. She couldn't help but feel the weight of it. Everyone was listening. Her back straightened slightly. She moved into the next section, where the melody changed from strength to something more delicate. It was almost like the piece was giving her a chance to breathe before the next challenge. She accepted the moment. Her hands softened, barely brushing the keys at times. The notes were gentle now, almost whispering. The way they echoed made her chest tighten, not from fear, but from a strange, quiet emotion she couldn't fully express. It was the feeling of letting herself be seen through sound. She didn't notice that some of the students had leaned forward in their seats. She didn't notice that the renowned pianist had uncrossed his arms completely. She didn't notice the small spark of surprise in his eyes. She only knew the piano, and the piano knew her. As she played the soft melody, she realized something important. This part of the music felt like the story of her own life. Simple, quiet, often overlooked, but filled with more strength than people realized. She let that thought guide her hands. Her fingers glided across the keys with a new tenderness, one that came from remembering every moment she had fought to keep music in her life. The days when she felt tired but still practiced. The nights when she played softly so no one would wake. The moments she doubted whether she was good enough. All of it poured into the notes. Then the piece changed direction again. The transition into the final rise approached one of the most dramatic parts of the entire piece. It required precision and power at the same time. It was the moment that separated a timid player from one who truly understood the music. And she was right there, at the edge of it. Her hands hovered briefly. Her breath steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. Then she began the climb. The notes rose quickly, each one landing with certainty. She wasn't forcing anything now. Her hands were leading her, not the other way around. The melody grew stronger, brighter, wider, until it felt like the entire hall was filled with nothing but sound. Her heart pounded, matching the rise in the music. She felt powerful, not because the notes were loud or fast, but because she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't doubting every movement. She wasn't waiting to fail. She was finally playing the way she always wished she could. Another shift came, this time sharper, requiring her to jump several keys in a single movement. She nearly hesitated, but her fingers stretched without her thinking. They reached the right spot. They struck the right notes she didn't miss. A small ripple of emotion went through her body, almost like relief. She kept going faster, stronger, with each note lifting her a little higher. She had no idea that the renowned pianist's eyes had widened slightly. He had seen thousands of students. He had heard countless performances. But something about the way she played, about the raw honesty in her sound, was different. He wasn't expecting this, none of them were. But she didn't know that. She was too lost in the music. The hall remained silent, except for the ringing of the piano. She moved through the final measures of the rising section, each note falling exactly where it was meant to be. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, not for show, but because she couldn't help it. Then came the moment the piece softened again. She shifted seamlessly, letting the intensity fall into something calm and thoughtful. Her hands slowed, easing back into a gentle touch. It felt like closing a door after a storm, quiet, steady, peaceful. This part always reminded her of standing outside after rain, when everything felt clean and new. She played it with that memory in mind, adding a softness she didn't even realize she was capable of. Her breath steadied, her heartbeat slowed. The room felt warm around her. She didn't know the expression on anyone's face. She didn't know that the pianist, who, doubted her at the beginning now watched her with careful attention instead of impatience. She only knew the keys beneath her fingers. As she neared the end of the section, she could feel the last part approaching. It wasn't the ending that wasn't here yet, but it was the part that would lead her into the final emotion of the piece. And she was ready. Her hands lifted gently, letting the last notes of the section drift into the air, soft and lingering. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just a quiet space that held the weight of everything she had just played. She paused, but not out of fear this time, out of understanding. She could feel the end coming. She could feel the music preparing to wrap around her one more time. And as she placed her hands back onto the keys, she knew she wasn't the same girl who walked into the room. She had found something inside herself, something she didn't even know she was missing, and she was ready to finish what she started. The next day felt heavier than usual for her, even though nothing dramatic had happened on the surface. She woke up early, long before the sun had softened the sky, and sat quietly at the small table near the window. The world was still, the streets outside silent, and it gave her time to think. She replayed the pianist's reaction from the day before in her mind, the raised eyebrow, the doubtful smirk, and the way he had spoken as if he had already decided she would fail before she even touched a key. For a long moment, she wondered why she cared so much about what he thought. But deep down, she already knew the answer. All her life, people had judged her before giving her a chance. Some thought she looked too unsure, too ordinary, too quiet to have real talent. But she had always believed that music grew inside a person, not on top of them. And now, more than ever, she wanted to prove that. Not for him, not even for the audience, but for the girl inside herself who had once dreamed of playing on a grand stage. Without being dismissed, as the sun finally rose, she prepared herself for another day at the training hall. Her hands were a little tense, but she shook them out gently and whispered to herself that she could do this. When she arrived, the pianist was already there, standing near the grand piano with a clipboard in hand. His expression was as unreadable as always, but today, he didn't give her the same immediate look of doubt. "You're early," he said without looking up. "So are you," she replied softly. For a moment, neither spoke. The room felt too large for just the two of them, but she didn't let the silence bother her. She took her seat at the piano, letting her fingertips hover over the keys. The pianist watched her, not with the same challenging look as before, but with something slightly different, maybe curiosity. "All right," he finally said. "Let's continue from where we stopped yesterday. I want you to play the section you struggled with." She nodded. She knew the section he meant. It was the fast run of notes that required both precision and emotion, something that was hard to balance. She took a slow breath, closed her eyes for just a second, and began to play. At first, her fingers moved carefully, almost too carefully. But then she remembered the feeling she had when she practiced alone at home, the feeling of letting the music guide her. So she loosened her shoulders and allowed the notes to flow. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Every note carried a piece of her. When she finished, the pianist didn't immediately respond. He simply stared at her hands. "You're improving," he finally said. It wasn't praise, but it also wasn't doubt. It was plain truth, and somehow it meant more to her than any compliment. For the next 2 hours, they worked together. He corrected her posture, her timing, and even her breathing. Though his tone remained serious, she could tell he was teaching her with more care now. He wasn't expecting her to fail anymore. He was expecting her to grow. By midday, others began entering the training hall. Some students came to warm up, some to observe. She noticed a few watching her, but she didn't let their eyes distract her. She focused on the piano, on the feel of the keys under her hands, and on the small progress she could feel each time she played. One of the students whispered, "Is she the one performing later?" Another replied, "I think so." I heard the pianist didn't believe in her at first. Hearing that made her chest tighten slightly, but she kept her eyes on the keys. Rumors didn't matter. What mattered was how she played. Later in the afternoon, the pianist surprised her by saying, "Take a 15-minute break." She blinked at him. "A break?" "Yes, you've earned it." She stepped outside the hall and sat under a nearby tree. The breeze was gentle, carrying the soft sounds of distant conversations and footsteps. She rested her hands on her lap, feeling the faint soreness in her fingers, a soreness she welcomed, because it meant she was working, improving, getting closer to what she wanted. As she sat there, she thought about the performance ahead. It wasn't going to be a large audience, but important people would be there: musicians, teachers, and of course, the renowned pianist who had once doubted her. She knew she couldn't think about pleasing any of them. She needed to play the way she always loved playing. With heart. After the break, she returned inside and saw the pianist standing beside the piano, almost as if he had been waiting for her. He motioned for her to sit. "Let's try the full piece now," he said. She nodded slowly, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. She placed her hands on the keys and began. From the first note, she focused on the emotion behind the music. She wasn't thinking of technique or mistakes. She simply played. She let the melody rise and fall like a story. Let the soft notes whisper and the strong notes speak. Halfway through the piece, she noticed the pianist standing a little closer, listening more deeply. She didn't let it distract her. She kept going, pouring kindness, strength, and honesty into every part of the music. When the final note faded away, the room fell silent. She lifted her hands slowly, letting the moment settle. This time, the pianist didn't hide the emotion in his face. His expression softened, and for the first time, she saw genuine respect there. "You played with heart," he said quietly. "That is something many skilled players forget." The words warmed her in a way she didn't expect. She nodded slightly, unsure what to say. "You still need polishing," he added, returning to his usual tone. "But what you have, it cannot be taught. Not by anyone." She didn't mind the added criticism. She knew he was right. Every musician, no matter how talented, always had more to learn. For the rest of the day, they practiced with a shared understanding. The pianist corrected her less harshly, and when she made mistakes, he didn't sigh or shake his head. Instead, he asked her to try again, to feel the music deeper, to play with intention. As evening approached and the hall grew quieter, he finally said, "That's enough for today. Go home and rest. Tomorrow is important." She closed the piano lid gently and stepped back. The room felt different now, less intimidating, more familiar. "Thank you," she said softly. The pianist paused. "I'll be expecting your best tomorrow," she smiled. "You will get it." On her walk home, she thought about everything she had gone through until now, the doubts, the pressure, the long hours of practice. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt something else rising inside her: confidence. Not the loud kind, not the kind that needed attention. It was a quiet confidence, the kind that came from knowing she had worked hard, from trusting her own hands, her own heart. That night, she didn't practice. She didn't need to. She sat by the window again, listening to the distant hum of the city, letting herself breathe. She imagined the performance the next day, the piano waiting for her under the lights, and the moment she would begin to play. She didn't imagine perfection. She imagined honesty. As she finally lay down to rest, she knew she was ready. Tomorrow, she would step onto the stage not as the girl who people doubted, but as the girl who had something real to share. And she promised herself that no matter how the audience reacted, she would play with everything inside her. With truth, with heart, with the strength she had earned every single day leading to this moment. She stood there for a moment, not fully believing the sound that still lingered in the hall. The last note had faded so gently that it felt as if the piano itself had taken a breath and gone quiet with her. For a few seconds, no one said a word. The room stayed completely still, almost frozen in time, as if everyone needed just one more second to understand what had happened. And she, sitting on the piano bench with her hands resting on her lap, felt her heart beating so fast she could almost hear it. She didn't know whether she had done well or whether she had made mistakes. All she knew was that she had given everything she had. Slowly, she lifted her head. She could finally see the faces in front of her. The same people who had been whispering earlier now sat wide-eyed, not moving at all. The expression on each face told her the same thing. They had not expected what they heard. Even the renowned pianist, who had been so certain she would fail, didn't look the same anymore. He wasn't leaning back or judging her with tired, half-closed eyes. He was standing slightly forward, hands pressed together in front of him, like someone trying to understand a mystery. She didn't know what that meant, but it made her chest feel lighter. Then, something surprising happened. The pianist slowly stood up from his chair. It was such a simple action, but in that silent room, it felt like the sound of a drum. Everyone turned to look at him. She didn't know why he was standing. She had never seen him stand after anyone else's performance. Her breath caught as he stepped closer, his eyes fixed on her as if she had done something impossible. A moment later, the applause began. It started small, with a few soft claps, but then it grew louder and louder, until it filled every corner of the hall. People stood up one by one, and soon almost everyone was applauding. Some clapped with wide smiles, others clapped slowly, as if trying to understand what they had just witnessed. She blinked several times, unsure whether she was dreaming or awake. No one had ever applauded her like this. She had played in school concerts before, but nothing like this. She stood up from the piano bench, her legs trembling slightly. She tried to give a small bow the way she had practiced at home, but her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold them by her sides. Still, she managed a soft smile. She didn't want to cry, even though she felt tears rising, not out of sadness but relief. She had walked into this hall questioning herself. She didn't know if she belonged here, but now, something inside her felt different, not louder, not proud, but steady, like a voice whispering gently that she had earned her place. The pianist walked toward her with slow, thoughtful steps. The applause softened as people realized he wanted to speak. When he finally reached her, she felt even smaller than before, not because he was intimidating, but because the moment was so big. He looked at her as if studying her face, trying to understand how someone so young could carry so much emotion in their music. When he finally spoke, his voice was not sharp or distant. It was calm, almost warm. He told her that what she played was not simply skilled, it was honest, pure. He said that some people spend years perfecting technique, but never learn how to make others feel something. She, he said, had done both, not because someone taught her to play like that, but because she carried something inside her that couldn't be taught. She didn't know how to respond. She felt her throat tighten, not out of fear, but because the words hit her so unexpectedly. She had never thought of her music as something powerful. She had always played because it gave her comfort, because it helped her think, because it was the one thing she could rely on when everything else felt uncertain. Hearing someone like him talk about her music like that made her feel something she had never felt before, a sense of worth she had secretly wished for but never dared to expect. The pianist then did something that surprised the entire room. He extended his hand to her, not just a handshake, but a gesture of deep respect, one usually offered only to performers he admired. Her breath caught again. She looked at his hand for a moment and then gently placed hers in it. The hall became quiet again, but this time it felt like a peaceful quiet, full of meaning and understanding. After that, he said something she would never forget for the rest of her life. He told her that talent like hers came once in a long time, that she had something special, something rare, something that deserved to be nurtured and shared with the world. He said she had the heart of a true prodigy, not because she wanted attention or fame, but because she played with sincerity. For a moment, she didn't move. She could only look at him, unsure whether she had heard correctly. The word prodigy was something she had only seen in books, or heard people say about musicians far older or more experienced than her. She never imagined anyone would say it about her. She felt her eyes sting again, and she took a deep breath to steady herself. As the applause returned, louder than before, she realized something important. The world around her had not changed, but she had. She had walked into this hall feeling like someone who needed to prove herself. Now she was walking away with something much bigger than approval. She was walking away with belief, not just from others, but from herself. As people came forward to congratulate her, she tried to stay humble and kind. She didn't want to lose the simplicity that had kept her grounded. She spoke softly, smiled shyly, and listened to every kind word. Everyone wanted to know how long she had been playing, who had taught her, what inspired her, and whether she planned to perform more publicly. She didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, she wasn't scared of the future. Later, when the hall finally emptied and she walked outside into the cool evening air, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The sky above was turning darker, and the streetlights glowed softly, giving everything a peaceful golden look. She held her bag close to her chest, taking small steps as she tried to understand everything that had happened. She knew that life wouldn't suddenly become perfect. She knew there would still be challenges, still moments of doubt, still days when she felt unsure. But now she had something strong to hold on to, something that couldn't be shaken by whispers or doubts. She had proof that her passion mattered. As she walked home, she thought about the moment the pianist had stood for her. That single action would stay with her forever, not because it meant she had achieved something big, but because it showed that even people who seemed impossible to impress could be moved by sincerity. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had shaken with fear earlier now felt steady. She didn't know exactly where her path would lead, but she knew one thing clearly: she would keep playing, not for applause, not for praise, but because music was a part of her. It had always been her voice even when she had none. And now, the world had heard that voice.